Labor News Conference. Welcome to another edition of Labor News Conference, a public affairs program brought to you by the AFL-CIO. Labor News Conference brings together leading AFL-CIO representatives and ranking members of the press. Today's guests are Bert Seidman, director of the AFL-CIO Department of Social Security, and Robert Ball, former commissioner of the Social Security Administration, now at the National Academy of Science Institute of Medicine. The AFL-CIO has urged that the Social Security Administration should be separated from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare and established as an independent, non-political agency. Mr. Ball, who was Social Security Commissioner for 11 years, serving presidents of both parties in that capacity, has also urged an independent, non-political Social Security Administration. Here to question Mr. Ball and Mr. Seidman about that proposal and other issues related to Social Security are Theodore Schuchat, syndicated columnist for the North American Newspaper Alliance, and Al Goldsmith, editor and publisher of the Washington Insurance Newsletter. Frank Harden speaking. And now, Mr. Schuchat, I believe you have the first question.
Mr. Ball and Mr. Seidman, does the proposal for an independent Social Security agency have any significant support in Congress?
Well, it has very distinguished support. It's a bill that is jointly sponsored by Senator Church and Congressman Mills, who is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee that would be dealing with the subject. In addition to that, there are 35 senators in the Senate who have co-sponsored the bill with Senator Church.
Well, Mr. Ball, do you think that in view of this accelerating support for an independent agency, that there is a good chance of such an agency being enacted into law next year?
Or even this year. I think there's a very good chance of its becoming law at least by next year. It's, to me, a very important proposal. And I must say that it's not just that it's an independent agency separate from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. It's a three-man board set up to keep the program out of politics, to emphasize the trustee nature of Social Security, and to, as part of the same bill, the contributions that people make for their protection under Social Security would be segregated and kept absolutely separate from all other funds of the federal government.
Mr. Goldsmith, I might add something to what Mr. Ball said. In the first place, the AFL-CIO is not the only organization by any means which has officially come out in favor of this, even though the bill that Mr. Ball refers to has been introduced only quite recently. The National Council of Senior Citizens, which is an organization with a membership of 3 million older persons, has endorsed this program, and of course they have a very great interest in the Social Security program. The other thing I want to point out is that the Social Security program at its inception was administered by an independent Social Security board. And what has happened since then is that by being put into the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, it has been sort of submerged, and there has been a tendency to mix the interests and objectives of the Social Security program, which are very distinct and are very important for all the American people, with some of the political interests of whoever happened to be in charge at any particular moment of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And we think that the independent Social Security Administration will be independent not just administratively, but it will also be much more independent of these, what we consider to be irrelevant political considerations.
Mr. Simon, I'm not sure whether you agree with me or not, but it seems to me there's considerable amount of misunderstanding in the country today about what I consider the real nature of Social Security. And that is, I think it's a government-operated group insurance plan and retirement system that employers and employees are paying for this protection. And it seems to me to make sure that people understand that, it's very important that the financing be separate from the rest of the funds of the Treasury and that those funds be held by a separate organization, just as you would have a separate private insurance company.
Well, Mr. Ball, you raise a very significant point there, namely that the financing of the Social Security system has always been geared to employer and employee tax contributions. Now, there is a distinct move on now, of which the AFL-CIO is a supporter, for more use of general revenues in financing the Social Security trust funds. Do you think that that is proper, or do you think it is a slap in the face to the basic principles of the system?
No, I would favor a limited contribution from general revenues to the Social Security system. I think that there is a total national federal interest in having a Social Security system that's properly recognized by the general taxpayer paying part of the cost. I would be very much opposed, personally, to having the major part or all of the costs come out of general revenues. I think it's very significant and very important to preserve the rights that people have under Social Security, that there be a direct contribution
Mr.
by
Gold,
the individual who gets that protection to the system.
Mr.
Earmarked.
Goldsmith, since you mentioned the AFL-CIO position, I might expand on it just a little. The AFL-CIO position is that there should be gradually introduced into the financing of the Social Security system funds from the general revenues of the federal government, so that eventually 1/3 of the costs of the system would be paid out of general revenue, 1/3 would continue to be paid by employee taxes, and 1/3 by employer taxes. Now, as a matter of fact, as I'm sure Mr. Ball would confirm, this was the original idea of the founders of our Social Security system, that, as a matter of fact, somewhat earlier than now, this situation would have been brought about. And we think that further improvements in the Social Security system ought to be paid for to a very considerable extent out of general revenue. This would still mean that the program would continue to be contributory, but there would be this third element added out of the general tax funds of the government.
Gentlemen, you've mentioned the support for this proposal in Congress. What about the opposition? What is the extent of the opposition on Capitol Hill?
Frankly, I haven't heard of any organized opposition to this proposal. On the other hand, I should say that it has not yet received a great deal of attention. But, Mr. Schuckert, I believe that this is a proposal which will get a lot of attention in the next session of Congress, in other words, in the Congress that will meet next January. I think this because while it hasn't had a great deal of attention in the sense of having a lot of discussion in the Congress, the fact that it does have such prestigious sponsorship, I think, is an indication that it's a proposal which will be taken very seriously and has a good chance for enactment.
Gentlemen, we have, is there anything that can be said about the record of President Ford when he was in Congress with respect to Social Security legislation?
Well, I believe that President Ford is a strong supporter of the Social Security system and its general approach, the concept that you should plan ahead of time against these risks of retirement, against the risk that a widow and orphans would be left without means of support, planned ahead protection against loss of income because people become totally disabled, and the whole concept of people paying toward their own protection, having it grow out of their work, fits in very well, I'm sure, with the President's philosophy.
Mr. Schuckert, I think that we really don't know what his position is going to be. I would hope that he would recognize that the protection of the American people, not just the elderly, but also widows and orphans and the disabled, will require the strengthening and improvement of the Social Security system, and particularly the defense of the basic Social Security principles. I say this last because I think that there seems to be a good deal of misunderstanding about the system, more than I would have thought one would have in view of the fact that it has existed now for 40 years. But nevertheless, there is, and I think that it is very important that the Ford administration come to the defense of the Social Security system because of its fundamental importance to the American people.
Mr. Ball, in view of your long experience as Social Security Commissioner, during those years and even currently, there has been a continual move for increased benefits and increased liberalizations in the Social Security law. Generally speaking, such action requires an increase in taxes, and taxes have now reached 11.9% of combined employer-employee rate. How much farther can we go, do you believe, without bringing about cries to put the brakes on?
Well, I think there's considerable resistance now to further increases in the rate as such, and that's why I would agree with what Mr. Seidman said, that gradually some general revenue funds should be introduced into the support of the system. But at the same time, I think it ought to be very clear that the system that we have today for people who are currently protected and will be coming on the rolls in the future is really a vastly improved system over what we used to think of as Social Security. The benefit rates related to people's past earnings are really now quite respectable. And these improvements that have come about will be kept up to date with automatic provisions that are in the law. And this goes so far that not only are those on the rolls protected against inflation with automatic increases in their benefits, but the current worker contributing today will have his benefits under present law about kept up to date with increasing wages. Now that's very valuable protection.
Mr. Goldsmith, I'd like to add something to what Mr. Ball has said. In the past, the AFL-CIO and other groups who have been for improving and strengthening the Social Security system have been in favor of overall, across-the-board increases in Social Security benefits. Now, to a large extent, this is going to, and to a large extent that was necessary in order to keep pace with the increase in prices, in the cost of living of the people who depend on the Social Security system for their incomes. Now, this is going to be done on an automatic basis, and it is being done on an automatic basis. Nevertheless, despite the fact that we have had these improvements, there are some people who are not getting the kind of Social Security benefits that we think they should be getting. Let me give you an example. Or they're not getting them at a time when they need them. One example is the worker who becomes disabled, but not sufficiently disabled to get Social Security benefits under the rather rigorous definition of disability that we have now. And this particularly hurts a worker, let's say, after the age of 55. Now, we think that we need an occupational definition of disability for such workers. We can do some things to make the Social Security benefit relate more directly to the pre-retirement earnings of workers in the years just before they retire. There are other improvements that can be made, not across the board, but in what might be called the structure of the Social Security system.
One of the things that I'd add to that list of possible improvements in Social Security, it seemed to me to have a very high priority, would be to pay the total disability benefits to people who are disabled for a shorter period of time. At present, you can't get a Social Security benefit unless it's expected that you're disabled for a full year because of the disability. I mean, you can't get a disability benefit. Most every other country that have contributory social insurance systems, and of course most countries do, have a short-term disability program. We only have that in just a few states. I think it'd be good to reduce that waiting period that we have down to about 3 months instead of presently you have a 6 months and you have to make a prognosis it's going to last another 6 months.
Do you gentlemen feel that the imminent enactment of major pension reform legislation will have any impact one way or the other on a stimulus for greater Social Security benefits?
I really don't. I don't know about Mr. Seidman, but it seems to me in this country we have a 3-level approach to old age security. We have basically a universal contributory social insurance system, our Social Security program. Then on top of that, up to about half the workers in the country have a private pension plan where they're building some additional protection. And underlying the whole, we have a means-tested assistance program for the people who can't get a sufficient income out of those other 2 methods. And I think we're going to keep that kind of an approach.
I'd just like to add to what Mr. Ball said, that when he said that half are covered, what he means is that half someday may get a pension. But of those who are retiring now, a very much smaller proportion are eligible for private pensions, and that means that most people still depend very largely on their Social Security payments for their income when they're retired.
That was one of the points of my question, that this reform legislation is supposed to relieve some of that business of people not getting the pensions to which they are entitled when they reach retirement age. Do you believe that this is impossible of achievement?
I didn't say it's
No.
impossible of achievement. I'm saying that as of now and for the near term, the proportion of retirees who will be eligible for private pensions will be relatively small, much less than 50%.
Private pensions are important, but you can really overestimate their effect. About 20% of the people over 65 today get them. I can hardly foresee a time when as many as 50% would actually get them. Whereas Social Security protection is just about universal, follows everybody from job to job, and we certainly have to continue the emphasis on that basic program.
Gentlemen, you've commented about increases in Social Security benefits and improvements in the Social Security program. If the consumer price index, the cost of living, continues to increase at its recent rate, will there be any money left for any improvements in Social Security? Won't all the available funds from general revenue as well as the Social Security tax simply go to keep the benefits abreast of inflation?
If you're going to
Mr. Schuckert, the first thing that we have to do is to stop this double-digit inflationary rate, and that's a number one objective. But we cannot use this as an excuse for not carrying on the improvements in Social Security that are needed.
But it is true that new benefits would require new financing. I'm not concerned about support of the present benefits. That financing, I believe, will be taken care of under the present approach, and we do have some problems down the road, considerable, maybe in the next century, where I think we're going to need to introduce some general revenues. But by
You
and
have to
large,
introduce the general revenues long before the next century, Mr. Ball. We
if you
to
have
do it
improvement,
now.
if you have improvement.
Yeah, and we need improvements
But
now.
I don't think you have to introduce it to support the present system.
Thank you, gentlemen. Today's Labor News Conference guests were Robert Ball, former Commissioner of Social Security, and Bert Seidman, Director of the AFL-CIO's Department of Social Security. Representing the press were Al Goldsmith of Washington Insurance Newsletter and Theodore Schuckert of the North American Newspaper Alliance. This is Frank Harden speaking and inviting you to listen again next week. Labor News Conference is a public affairs production of the AFL-CIO, produced in cooperation with the Mutual Broadcasting System.